Today, we had the pleasure of meeting Guru Benny, a marriage and family therapist who also creates thought provoking content on self development and spirituality. Her mission is to help others heal their trauma, strengthen their interpersonal relationships, and improve their perceptions of the world. During this conversation, we talk about how her experience with death was the catalyst to her beginning this work and how the challenging times in her life have allowed her the most growth.
She shares how the law of polarity states that as long as darkness exists, there will be an equal amount of light. And whatever we choose to focus on, we will create more of. We also dive into the energy of attracting the things that you want in your life and how spending time alone can lead to clarity on how to create a positive impact on the world. This was such a perspective shifting conversation, and we hope you enjoy this episode. All right, well, Benny, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, for anyone listening who isn't familiar with your work, how do you describe what you do?
So I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I actually have multiple roles. So as a therapist, I help people with their interpersonal relationships. As Guru Benny, I kind of do the same thing, but on a more deeper level. So my goal is to get people to strengthen their interpersonal relationships, but with the goal of strengthening the relationship that they have with themselves as well. So kind of both of those things.
How do you differentiate the two? Like, at what point were you like, okay, I kind of need two entities to do, the two things that I feel called to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So with therapy, it's kind of like very limited and restrictive because, you have to do things that are ethical in alignment with your license. So I was like, I can't just stop here. There would be things that I would like want to tell clients and stuff. And like legally, ethically, I couldn't say those things. So I feel like just basic therapy is kind of like very limiting. So I had to like branch out and do the other side of things so I could get like deeper into it.
Okay.
Do you think there's an intersection of spirituality and therapy, or do you think they are pretty separate?
They're for sure intersected for sure. The only thing that would make them separate is like what I said before is the ethical things. But I feel like if people integrated spirituality into therapy more often, I hope in the future it evolves and they start to invite the more spiritual aspects into things. I think that people will have a way better experience in therapy. I know a couple of clients, they're like, I had a therapist prior before you, and they just don't really always get what they need out of it. And I feel like it's
hmm
because there's those barriers and those limitations just trying to be, socially acceptable in certain areas. So, but they're definitely intertwined for sure.
What kind of limiting experiences have you had as far as with your therapy practice and not being able to maybe say everything that you want to say? Like, where do those boundaries kind of lie?
Well, therapists are not supposed to really give their opinion on anything. They're more supposed to just talk with people and let them come up with their own conclusions, which I love. So like a limitation would be a barrier that I've experienced would be, clearly something is toxic or it's not a good fit for someone. And I have, the idea to like move them in a different direction, but that's as a therapist, that's not my role. So basically not being able to share my opinion and kind of just like unfortunately having to like watch my clients figure it out on the, just for example, if someone is in a relationship that I believe is toxic and I'm like, okay, it's time to go, I can't tell them get a divorce.
hmm
I just have to support wherever they want to go with it. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But, I believe that it doesn't matter because eventually everybody always comes to the conclusions that suit their soul for sure. Eventually, sometimes it takes longer
hmm
than it should, but they get there. So
You're more like cheering them on instead of being able to be like, hey, this is maybe something you should think about doing or action you should take. It's just like, you got this.
and both of those approaches are effective. Sometimes people need the cheering on, and then they eventually are like, you know what, this is actually not good for me. So they're both effective approaches. My just naturally, I'm more of like a solution focused, strategic, like, okay, let's do this. This is not working. So then we're not going to do that. But,
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like my experience with therapy is exactly that. Like, I, I feel like I've stepped into those spaces where I need immediate help on something or finding guidance. And it's always funny because I feel like every time that I've had a situation where I'm like, okay, I need someone to hold space for me right now, or to talk through something, or to figure out solutions, like you said. I always go thinking like, okay, they're gonna have the answers for me, and then I start, we start the sessions and stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is all me, which is really empowering, but at the beginning it can be really frustrating sometimes, I feel like, because I'm like, okay, I'm now, hiring this person to talk me through the situation, and I'm going to figure out like, how to handle it. And it's like, well, you're going to figure it out, And so it's really interesting. Because then I feel like at some point too, I understand how you would kind of hit this, and I may just be talking about my own experience, but like kind of hitting this barrier, like you said, where I'm like, okay, but I'm ready for like that next
Like the deeper level
step. Yeah. Which I think is why, we do everything that we do, because I do have an interest in that, like the interpersonal world. So I think it's really interesting that you do kind of have your two lanes that you live in or work with. Have you ever had anyone kind of transfer over to the other side of work, like being their therapist and then moving into, doing your Guru Benny work?
Like a client, like
Yeah.
moving, that is illegal.
Oh.
Yeah, that's illegal. So I can't, technically I can't give therapy outside of, my state or like my agency and stuff like that. So that's why what I do I'm very like specific about the words that I use. I'm not ever like, I'll go like one-on-one sessions, not therapy sessions, because that would like
Okay.
too. So I can't even, if I work with a client, I'm in Ohio. So every state has their own. Where are you guys? California?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your state laws might be different, but if I have a client now in Ohio, like now, and our sessions end, I couldn't see them for an extended period of time. They couldn't, and I go to like a different agency, they couldn't follow me there. So there's so many like little.
Interesting. Can
I
they eventually?
What?
Is there like a amount of time that you have to wait? Can they eventually, or?
Yeah, I believe it's like 6 months or something like that. It's not
Okay.
a big deal, but it's just there's so many little things. Like I couldn't, once you're my client, I can't be your friend. Like I can't,
Mm.
give therapy. Obviously, I guess legally to like friends or family. It's a lot of little things. So
With your Guru Benny work, I'd love to hear kind of the tools and modalities that you use in that practice versus kind of that more traditional therapy.
hmm so right now, my favorite modality is CBT. So that's cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's pretty much just like all about the mind. So we believe that our thoughts influence our emotions and our emotions influence our behaviors. So they're all tied together. And so if someone is, lashing out all the time, or if they have very just, maladaptive behaviors or negative behaviors that they're doing, we always go back into changing their thought processes and think about that. So that is one of the modalities that I really like. In addition to emotion focused therapy, which it targets the emotions and how to get people to identify with specific emotions so they can express them the right way. Because a lot of time people misplace how they feel. So they're sad, but they're lashing out at their partner, or they're angry and they might even cry. So it's really just about like getting people to really identify with specific emotions and understand them in a way that they can properly then articulate it. It's hard to express because people don't understand exactly how they're feeling, why they're
Mm-hmm.
feeling that, what their trigger, where their triggers came from, and stuff like that. So emotion focused and cognitive behavioral working together is like chef's kiss.
Yeah. And
So you're really getting kind of to the root of it, it sounds like, walking them back so then they can actually deal with what's going on instead of like the result of that.
Absolutely. And I'm so big into just the mind. So when I realized that there was a modality specifically targeting the mind, I was like, yeah, I'm using that one forever.
yeah, and I'm sure it can also just like shift between clients, or what people need specifically. I'd love to know like your origin story. Like, how did you get interested in this work, the mind, helping people? Maybe something about your own story. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually have a background in science. So I was at one point a scientist, like my undergraduate degrees in biology. So I
Hmm.
thought that I wanted to just do experiments, and I thought I wanted to be a medical doctor and all those things. So after graduating, I realized like I was really just doing what everybody else wanted me to do. Like no one ever knew anything about, well, I shouldn't say no one, but it wasn't in the job description growing up in school, like, what do you want to be? Oh, I want to be Guru Benny on social media. Have a class or something like that was never an option. So I just went, the traditional route. And after I graduated, I was like, this is just literally not for me. Like, I always knew that I wanted to help people, but being so heavily in the medical field, because I was on a pre-med track, just going out and doing like clinical work, I was like, well, this is, and no shade to doctors, because I love my doctors and we need them, but I'm like, this is kind of pointless. It was feeling too late. Like, it was feeling everyone that was sick was already ill. Like, and now we're just trying to give them medicine to like mask whatever it is. But then I was like, what is going on? Like, there's something that gets people to this point, because an example would be like, sometimes diseases are inherited. You could get a gene that would, make you a candidate for having like breast cancer. But let's say two sisters have the same gene. One sister gets cancer, the other sister doesn't get cancer. Was it the gene? Like, what was different? And then I realized that it's really just a lot of, external things, environmental factors, and the mind. So the mind was like, what would be the difference between survival and death or illness or all those things? So I was like, all right, I'm just going to leave this alone and I'm going to go to the root of the problem. I'm going to study the mind, which psychology, it was psychology. And then so I wasn't in school at the time because I'd graduated, and this was kind of my like, self-realization period in my life. And so I just did a lot of just self-education on psychology, and I went down a rabbit hole and I got really interested in it. Just educating myself and doing research and stuff, which I believe made learning better, because when I was in school, I did a good job in college, but it was just like I never cared about what I was learning about, because it was so like pushy and you got to take tests, and I didn't feel like free to learn. But when I was able to like just take my own time and learn what I wanted to learn, I really fell in love with psychology. And so after that, I was like, I should be a therapist. I should take what I've learned and see how I can apply it in real life and help others to do the same. And so yeah, here we are.
And then continuing on, I'm curious because I just love people's stories, because I'm like, okay, well, where did Guru Benny blossom from? Like, where did that kind of, on your evolutionary path, like you had this moment where you're like, okay, I think I need to expand a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to give credit to one of my friends in college. I've always been the type of person to like help people and like give them like, basic like girlfriend advice or whatever. But they were like, this is deep stuff. Like, this isn't just help. Like, so I was like talking to my friend one day about like her relationship issues that she was going through at the time. And she's just like, you know what? You're literally like a guru. And then before to that, I never heard anyone really say that. They said a bunch of stuff like, oh, thanks for the advice. And like, oh, whatever. But she's like, you're really a guru. And that kind of like stuck with me. So this was like my senior year of college. I was still thinking that I wanted to be a medical doctor and stuff like that. But after I graduated, I just held on to that name, and I just was like, I'm just going to use this name. It has a nice ring to it. And when I researched like what it meant, I was like, yeah, I'm taking this path. I'm going this way. And so it's kind of grew on that.
Do you feel like you were always kind of connected to those deeper parts of yourself? Like, were you always a spiritual person? Was there a moment? Did you have a spiritual awakening? What did that look like?
Yes. So kind of both. So I did always feel like I was spiritual, but I didn't know what it was. Like, I knew I was just a deep person, but I didn't know like that meant being spiritual or connected. I didn't know. I was so worldly. I didn't know anything about souls and anything about that. So I was like, okay, I'm a deep person. And I kind of just left it at that. I would say that although I was always a deep person and connected to something that I just couldn't identify with at the time, um, I've had a spiritual awakening. For me, I've had multiple. And I think that that is something that I will always continue to have. Especially if you have one, you're always gonna there's always gonna be a new level. And I've recognized that my spiritual awakenings always come after like some type of like adversity or something. So it's like once I make it through that tough time, that tough season, like once I guess learn the lesson. I hate saying that because I think it's just watered down, but there is lessons in it. Once I learned what I was supposed to learn in that like hard time, I like wake up. I'm like, oh, like, but you have to get through that. Once you're in it, it's just like all hell. But like once you get out of it, you're literally just not that person anymore. Once you get out of that, like it's like shedding, like a snake just shedding its skin, and it's like, oh, okay, new level, new level. But yeah, I've definitely had multiple awakenings. I look forward to them. And unfortunately, looking forward to awakenings means, you have to be open to adversity and difficult stuff. But I always, whenever I'm going through something difficult, I'm always like, okay, like at least I will be better. I'm going to another step. There's another level that I'm headed towards. And so that keeps me through that time. My first awakening, like the one big like kaboom that just started it all, would probably be when my father passed away, which was also around the time where I was graduating and stuff. And like I just went down a rabbit hole of like, what the hell does life mean? Like, what are we here for? Like, we're just here and then we're just gone. Like, what am I supposed to do here? Because I kind of like being transparent. I've evolved from that mindset, but at the time I was like 18, not 18, I was like 20 or something. I was terrified. I was like, well, I could be next. Like what? And so I really wanted to make sure that like I'm happy here and whatever I'm doing here is just like there's a reason, and I needed to get to the bottom of it. I needed to know why. But death was probably the thing that sparked it all.
Oh, I relate to that so much. I feel like for my experience, I experienced 5 deaths in a year, and it was like so intense. And I had never experienced death before that, but I was around the same age. And so it's so interesting when like death is the catalyst, because it can be so, you're going through it and it's like, this is just my reality. But for other people, they're like, whoa, like, did you have anyone around you who was like maybe watching you go through this evolution and didn't know how to interpret it?
Um, I was kind of by myself. Like,
Yeah.
although I have siblings, they were like going through it way more. They were not paying attention to anything. And that's another thing that like motivated me. I'm like, we can't all just like roll over and like die. Like,
Yeah.
ourselves, even though we're
Yeah.
alive, we can't
Yeah.
just, like, and that's not what our father would have wanted and stuff like that. So I kind of had to like take the lead and kind of like show them that life is still worth living and we're
Mm-hmm.
still here for a reason. And it's so tricky, like touching on that, because nobody likes an individualist. Like nobody, like our father passed and I'm like, okay, well, we're still here. And not, it's difficult because some people don't like that. They see it as selfish, but I don't think it's selfish. I think that as long as we can't do anything for others if we're just like sulking and not
Yeah.
there, not like present. So I think them watching me push through and take a, choose to acknowledge a different perspective kind of motivated them to do the same. But I was pretty
Yeah.
much alone on my journey, which I appreciate looking back at it now, because I wouldn't have gone through that rabbit hole of trying to learn all these things. And I wouldn't have really had the opportunity to connect with myself if I was masking it just by trying to be around other people and stuff like that.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
needed the space to
Yeah.
to
To
go
really
through.
feel. Yeah.
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 I was curious if you have any advice for anyone going through grief, or if you had any insights on death that maybe, society doesn't normally talk about.
Well,
I know that one's not on our question list.
Big one.
yeah, I love this question. It's just so deep, and
Yeah.
I don't know how deep I could get here, but
You can get
um
as deep as you want. We go to the depths of it all. So
um although I'm not a grief counselor, I think just knowing about that we never really die, I think that's in a sense scares some people, but that's what gave me a sense of like, okay, that also made me want to live better, because I'm like, if I don't die, what am I still going to just be me in the afterlife? And the answer is yes. I'm not going to be necessarily my physical form or whatever the case may be, but soul wise, that's what goes along, and that's what, to me, that's what heaven and hell is. And we do live in heaven or hell on earth. However you're living on earth is how you're going to go off. So I don't believe that anybody's like at the door saying you go to hell and you go to heaven and you go to hell and you go to heaven. I believe that when the judgment day happens or whatever, we're the ones doing the judging. We're the ones condemning ourselves. We're the ones putting ourselves in a hell state, because we do it in human form anyway. It's just what it is. So for grief, like with death, I think just living your best life on earth will help you to accept the ones that you love that's gone, because that's what they want for you as well. They're still here. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
still watching you in this. They're actually super weird. I don't know. Okay, so when my father passed away, I had like this like epiphany or something that like if I felt like he was talking to me, and he said that sorry, he chose to go because he felt like he could do more
Mm-hmm.
in his spiritual form. Sorry. I'm stroking up, sorry. But yeah, he chose to go because he was limited in his human form, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just time to go. So that's another thing that gave me peace. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I was back there freaking just coughing the winds out. It's so weird.
Oh, sometimes things happen when they're supposed to happen, and I don't know. Maybe you were saying something that was just a lot of
I,
truth coming
I
out
was
or
gonna say,
something.
I feel like that's weird stuff will happen if people are speaking truth. Like technology will get weird, or like sometimes. So I'm like, honestly, yeah,
We're
I
fine.
literally thinking that, like, whoa, is there something I wasn't supposed to be saying? Like,
No, I think
hey,
I think it's the
you were
opposite.
supposed to be
Yeah,
saying it. Yeah,
well,
I think it was like
yeah,
a block coming out or
yeah,
something.
yeah.
I like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. We gotta flip it on its head.
I love that you talk about that because I feel like so many people feel like when someone passes, you no longer have a relationship with them. And I think you still can have a relationship. Obviously, it's different and it's changed, but I think that can bring peace to people when they realize like that person is still there. Obviously, it's just in a different form.
Exactly. Yeah. That's definitely what I use myself to just stay at peace. And you know what? I think it scares some people sometimes because, society makes the afterlife a little scary sometimes, with like, ghosts and the movie and stuff like that. So I get it. But um, our loved ones are still here. Another thing that since I have a science background, I always am able to like tie things back to science. And one of the laws being universal laws being, sorry, physical laws being energy cannot be created or destroyed. Literally, nothing can be created. Even when we have ice and it evaporates into vapor, it's still there. We just
Mm-hmm.
can't see it, but it's still there because nothing leaves. Nothing
Mm.
can be destroyed. So what happens is pretty much just like we just turn into vapor, however you want to, use it. We're obviously not literally just vapor, but however you want to use it to just understand the fact that your loved ones are, in fact, still rooting for you and a part of being a part of your story.
Yeah. Oh, it's so fun. I'm so excited to get into this part of the conversation because it feels, I don't know, very aligning for the conversations that we have. And it's interesting when we choose guests. Like, I was very drawn to your TikTok videos talking about the universal laws. And one of the things we often talk about is like the intersection of science and spirituality, just because there is that weird overlap. I mean, it's not weird, but they've been so separate for so long. And then I feel like as we evolve as humans and like, explore consciousness and things like that, you start to realize or have these epiphanies where you're like, okay, yeah, it was the law of what did you just reference? The law of the universal law of um
It was just a physics law.
the physics. Okay, yeah, okay, a physics.
It's yeah. There's levels to law. So there's universal laws, there's spiritual laws, and then there's physics laws. So that one was like in regards to like thermodynamics, but
Okay, amazing. Well, great. You know more than we do, so. But anyway, just the fact that you can, like bring together physics and the concept of death and, create this beautiful imagery with that. So I'd love to talk to you about, I guess, the different kinds of laws. And maybe we should start there. Like you said, the three different kinds right now. You said physics,
yeah.
spiritual, and the universal laws.
Yeah. So I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but topic wise, so there's physics laws that are like the law of gravity. Um, and that's when, something falls. That's considered a law. So a law is pretty much just like something that was tested multiple times and then people just said like, okay, this is what it's going to be, which is pretty much everything in the world. I remember I had a physics professor, genius man, but all my professors, he just was the one who never cared about anything. He was just like vibing, like he's just like whatever. And one day he told our class, he gave me an A. I love him because but he didn't care because it was just a letter. Like he was just like so above whatever. But one day he was like, nothing is real. Nothing is real. Like everything is only because we said it is. And I was just like, oh. That's interesting. Wow. And that definitely gave me a new perspective because, you know, physics ties in math and science. He's like, down to math, like, we made that. Like, like, someone made this. It wasn't a thing before. So, how did we decide that it was real? Because someone made it and everyone chose to follow it. And that's what makes laws. And I always bring that up because everyone's always like, well, what makes a universal law real or whatever? The fact that people have applied it and it works.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so that's physics laws, like the simple ones that we know, like gravity and force and stuff like that. And then spiritual laws are more of laws that are like the law of like detachment and stuff like that. So they're more into like the Dharma kind of thing. And then universal laws are more about like spiritual laws are more about like your own personal, like individual. And then universal laws are more about like collective, like the law of correspondence, like how we all kind of like influence each other. So
Hmm.
those are the laws.
How is your understanding of let's just stick with like the universal laws. How has that kind of shifted the way you see the world or maybe you exist in your day-to-day life?
Um, how's it shifted how I see the world? It's made my experience, my human experience, like really good. Like
Mhm.
it's they're really difficult to implement if you without the practice. But once you do it all the time, it's kind of like, okay, if something difficult is happening, you could revert back to one of those like laws. For example, the law of polarity just happens to be one of my favorite. I love them all because you need them all. You got to do them all. Like
Mhm.
the law of polarity right now just happens to be my favorite because it really put into perspective that like nothing is necessarily negative unless if that's what I want it to be. Things are mostly neutral. Well,
Mhm.
they could be negative or positive, but it's whatever you want it to be. And to know that there's so at a time like this, there's so much negativity going on. To know that by law there is an equal amount of positivity, you just have to go find it or pay attention to it or tune yourself to that so you could receive it. Is really empowering to me, and it helps me to like not wake up and be very mad to be
Yeah.
alive or
Hmm.
something. You know.
That was the
Yeah.
video that I found you, actually. I was sitting here in my head thinking, I want to ask her about the law of polarity because that video, I remember I watched it. I'm pretty sure I sent it to Danielle and then we lived together. So I went to her room and we probably like had a conversation about your video and I loved your perspective on it. And I think it brings so much, see there I go too, speaking truth. It brings so much just like hope to the world. And it's just, that's the beautiful part of social media is how many people like in the comments were just like learning from you and expanding their own lives and I think really tapping into that, if there is like the positive or if there is the negative then there's the equal amount of positive. So anyway, I'd love to talk to you about the law of polarity
Okay.
and kind of do you know what video I'm talking about? Or have you
Yes.
made multiple? Oh, you know which one I'm talking about. If we could
Yeah.
talk about that concept, I know you just touched on it a little bit, but just like really, people basically, I mean, you explain it. You go ahead and explain the video. It was your video.
So from what I remember,
Yeah.
um, there has been a lot of like, focus on war and the economy and all the negative things that are going on. So the video I made it to kind of give people just a new perspective because we can't do anything. You're literally tied if you have a negative mindset. Like if there that's not going to be what does it. Like posting and consuming. There was a couple of people in the comments who are like, well, that's an individualist approach. And it's not, even though it starts off as that way, but then you're able to make a bigger, you know what I mean? Like a bigger splash in the world
Mm-hmm.
when you get yourself and your mind right first. So a lot of people don't realize they believe for whatever reason. I think that it is actually it's for a reason. It was pushed on us to think this way that if the more we consume, the more we repost, the more we talk about it, that's doing the work. But that's actually making us go backwards because when we talk about those things, the energy associated with that negative energy is what we're tuning ourselves to. That's what we're
Mm-hmm.
setting out there, and then that will cause more war, that will cause more violence because we are consuming that is what our brain is absorbing, and that's what is going to come back out. So the goal would be to remove yourself and kind of just change your attraction point by being positive, by focusing on positive things as a collective. So you start doing that first, and then you're able to influence the person next to you, and they're able to influence the person next to that. The world is not going to change. definitely not going to change from an Instagram post. I'm sorry, but it's just not. It's not going to change. It brings awareness, and that's good because we need that awareness, that first level like exposure, like we know that this is going on. It's the overdoing of it that I think is making us go backwards.
Mm-hmm.
So first step is awareness. Cool, we got that out of the way. The next step would be to get the collective. The only way we're ever going to stop world hunger, war, is if we raise our consciousness as a collective. And that's why I do what I do, because I can't do much. I used to just be like, oh, I can do it by myself. And I would just like do the work by myself. I would read and I do everything by myself. And I was like, okay, I'm growing, but everybody around me is nothing's happening. And then so that I was like, okay, I got to expand. And that's actually what actually pushed me to start posting on social media. I had like a download one day, a realization, and God was like, you have to share this with other people. Like you can't go by yourself. It's
Mm-hmm.
no. So that's what I was like, okay, whatever. Because I was terrified of posting myself. I was just like, I'm just gonna do this in my little, I'm just gonna grow by myself. I'm so scared. But I just got on there one day and it was really scary for a long time. And then eventually I was just like, fuck it. But law of polarity.
I feel like you're such a beautiful living example of exactly what you're talking about. Like you said, everyone, you had people approach you and be like, that's such a individual way of thinking, and how is that really going to help the collective? But like for you, as you have developed your own skills or done your own interpersonal work, it's like you're now at a place like you got that download, and the universe, God, whoever was like, it's time for you to start posting and sharing. And it's like that's how you ended up here in the conversation that we're having, and now it's going to reach thousands of people here, and like everything that you've done on TikTok, which is so funny because I feel like social media has this connotation that it's just like surface level. And yes, it is. Like, obviously, there's a lot of garbage on the internet, but I also think it's a really beautiful place for people to make connections and people to learn, and for people like you to share. Could you talk about your experience in that world? Like I mean, obviously there's trolls out there. We've experienced that as well, but it is truly incredible how you can positively affect someone's life through like a TikTok video.
Yeah. Well, you kind of referenced the law of polarity right there. It's in every,
Mm,
so like how social media can be very negative, but on the same app, you can make it a very positive thing. It's literally in everything. So that's one example of the law of polarity.
I feel like for myself, and maybe you relate or maybe you don't, but I feel like it's, you're really scared at first to share these messages or these downloads that you're getting, and you're like, I don't know if I should do it. I don't know if I should show up. And then you have one video that hits and you're like, oh, okay. Like you kind of get that reciprocal energy back. And so it kind of pushes you to move forward. I'd love to just know your own kind of experience in that
Yeah.
space showing up.
Yeah. So I'm completely detached from the outcome of whatever happens, because I at one point wasn't, and I was doing it for the views. Like I was like, okay, my views are a reflection of my value. And so that actually caused a lot of resistance, and that actually caused me to have less views. And when I sat back and thought about it, I realized it was because I was keeping myself from receiving that, because I was attached to a specific outcome. Like I wanted it to be something specific. And something that I've learned is that when we push for something, what we're telling ourselves is that we don't have it. So that is our attraction point. That is
Mm.
what we're sending out. We're sending out into the world that we don't have it. And so that's what it's going to be. You're not going to have it. That's just how it's going to be. And that's something that I had to learn. And then like another thing that helped me to detach was that I was like, it's again, this is not really real. I'm going based off of an algorithm, because the law of polarity video that we're talking about that eventually did so well, I had posted that already in the past and literally got like
Really?
600. Yeah. So then I was like, so it wasn't the video, it wasn't the
Mm.
quality of the work that I was putting out. There's something else that is clearly out of my control, because I deleted that video because it was like no views. I was like, okay, whatever. And then I posted it again, maybe like a couple weeks or a month later, and then it did well. And that was another point in my journey of like being a content creator of like, so it wasn't me. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So um advice for anybody who's just making content and stuff is just, first of all, do what you love to do, because you're going to want to do it regardless of what people have to say, and detach from it. If you can't confirm that you're going to just be positive about it, like if you're someone like me who your emotions or whatever was like, it would flip flop based on how many views or followers you had, because that's how I was at one point, then completely detach. If you can't say that I can just be positive despite what I had, like whatever it is, the best bet would be to just, and I know it seems like, why would I not care? But that's what helps me. Like, that's
Yeah.
helped me get to where I am now. It's just not caring. If a video does well, and it's, I know this might sound, I don't even know what word I'm looking for, but if it maybe careless, I guess, but if a video does well, I'm just like, cool. And if it
Mm.
doesn't do well, I'm like, cool.
It's a very
And
That's
Buddhist
so good,
approach.
though. Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's like at the end of the day, you need to be enjoying the process of what you're making because no matter what level you are, you're always going to have those things that aren't going to do as well as you expected. Like, you just at the end of the day have to really have full trust in the content that you're making and enjoy making it. And then, yeah, I feel like just letting go of the rest of it because it's just, there's such an element of luck to it, such an element that's out of your control.
I would love to know if you have any advice for people who are, maybe it's social media, maybe it's anything in their life that they're trying to call in or trying to manifest in their life. And there is that resistance there where, because I feel like it's like when you put too much energy on it, where you're just like gripping onto a certain outcome, it's not going to come. But when you release it or when you become neutral, it's like that's when you allow the space and energy to come in. So I'd love to hear you kind of talk about that and what your experience has been with kind of just like observing that experience with calling things into your life and how you show up and like what energy you show up in to receive.
so the only thing that we can do in order to call things into our life would be to like focus on becoming, first of all, a positive person, so we could call in positive things. Those things would be attracted to us, and just focus on becoming either what that thing is or the person that has that thing. That's the only control we have. We can't, no matter what, there's no actions that we could do on the outside that would bring that to us. Our only duty would be, like, if you wanted to be a singer or something like that, would be to get up and sing every day or whatever the case may be and take the lessons. Picture yourself as the type of singer you want, whether it be a famous singer or a local singer, whatever. Watch maybe people who've already done what you've wanted to do and just mimic that. And then you will become that. It's super weird how that works, but it's pretty much just about becoming, first of all, positive, detaching, because in the detachment, you enter a neutral state where things are also still attracted to you, and then becoming what it is that you want to be. It being delusional. You have to be delusional. Like, you have to be like, I am this. This is what I am, and then everything around you will kind of start to mold to that. It's really trippy, and I feel like there's plenty of people I've done it. I do it all the time now because it just had to happen for me one time, and I'm now a patient person. I wasn't always a patient person, but there was like this one thing, I don't even remember, but something happened where I was like, I'm just going to wait this one out and see if it happens. And it happened. And so now with everything, I'm like, whatever, I'll just be patient. I think that's a lot of people's mistakes. They don't believe things are real because they never waited long enough for it to become real. Like, they're just like, yeah, this didn't work in 2 days. So like, I'm over it. But
Yeah.
definitely to be who you want, to have anything you want, just becoming those things. Be a person that has those things and they'll be yours.
Yeah. I want to talk about, and maybe the answer to my question is patience. But I want to talk about when you know what you want, you're calling it in, you've put it out there, you're taking the action steps, and there is that moment where it hasn't arrived yet. And it's so easy for your mindset to kind of shift in that moment of maybe turning to doubt or saying, oh, well, is this thing really meant for me? Can you talk about, those moments, the mindset that you need to really cultivate?
Mhm. I think when something is within you to do something, when you have like an inkling to do something, that's what you have to go back to, and that's gonna be what helps your mindset. For example, for me, I've had those doubts like all the time. It's part of being human. It's an emotion, just like happiness is an emotion and stuff like that. I kind of just walk myself through, and it's like, well, why am I doing this? Why do I want what I want and stuff like that? And just knowing that with patience, it will happen. And with everything, spiritual approach or therapy or a therapeutic approach, you just have to talk yourself through things. Like, you have to convince yourself that it's going to happen, that you're going to get it. Like, and be honest with yourself. It's not here now. That's okay, but it will be every day. If you wake up and it's not there, it's not here now. That's fine because it will be. You just keep taking those action steps. And a lot of in addition to action is just speaking it and writing it and bringing it to life. You have to really create the things that you want. And it's at first it's an annoying process because you're like, "Ugh, I have to do all this. Like, I just want what I want." But then you start to realize that that's actually why you're here, to create. That is creating, like writing and talking and doing and thinking, and just that's creating. And that's what makes people feel alive. We always want to know, like, what are we here to do? We're here to create the experience that we want. And that's not going to just happen instantly, because there would be no point of being an earth side if everything just happened instantly. We're here to learn. We're here to take the long way. I know it sounds crazy, but we are here to take the long way, because that's where you find the most enjoyment for fulfillment.
Mm. I'm really taking that in right now, because as you were talking about, like, at the beginning of the episode, the moments of darkness or those moments of transformation where it's like, yeah, it may be uncomfortable, but on the other side of things, you're going to literally be a new person because you're shedding a skin. I feel like I'm shedding a skin right now. And so the last like week or so, it's been interesting because I'm usually really good about holding that positive headspace, and like, especially doing what we do and being self-made and creating our careers and everything that we're doing ourselves. I'm sure you can relate. There's moments of doubt and worry and fear, and you've got to move through all of that stuff. And it's been really kind of intense this last week. And rather than like shaming myself for it or ignoring it, I've been really trying to sit with it. So everything that you're saying, I'm like, okay, this is good, because I feel like I'm not alone in this, and so many other people feel this way when you are working towards a goal or wanting to call something in for yourself and you're not there yet. Those like big moments of doubt, because I don't know what it is or where it's coming from, but I do like the belief that it's kind of coming up to the surface to be cleared so I can step into the next version. But it doesn't make it any easier when you're in it. You're like, gosh, dang it. This needs to end soon, please.
Yeah. Well, what you guys are doing is so big. Like, this is not just like you're, getting on social media and like just dancing. No shade. But
that might help if we did that.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, maybe we should just start
dancing.
Seems to be working for them. So, but honestly, that's just, things happen. Things like that they can see success quickly because it's not as grandiose. That's not as, I don't want to shame anybody, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What you guys are doing is really big. And so you're going to have a lot of roadblocks, because there are energies around that don't want you guys to do what you're doing, because it's going to really shift the collective in a way that we would not turn back from, So it's like, people who do big things they tend to come across the most hardships and the most roadblocks. And you start coughing when you talk about deep stuff. There's a lot that's going to be against you, because what you're doing is going to literally change the world. So just keep that in your mind and just keep going despite that, and know what you're doing it for. It's not for the views, because your account could be deleted tomorrow, but it's about the impact that you're making in people's lives, despite how many people saw it. You know what I mean? It could be, all you need is one person. Before we had social media, all you ever needed to do was touch one person, and that makes a ripple effect. So even 200, 300, 400 people, that's a lot of people. So just, the doubt's going to come. You get used to it eventually if you fight back. Like, if you're like, I don't care, oh, here it comes again, you got to make peace with your thoughts, make friends with them, because they're not leaving. So you make friends with those negative thoughts, and you say, well, I accept that you're here, but you really don't have any say. So enjoy your stay. Like, you have no power over me. And that's just what it is. It definitely, acknowledging it from a spiritual and a therapeutic approach, you don't want to repress it, or you don't want to act like you're not going through anything. You want to definitely bring those to the surface and kind of acknowledge them and meet them face to face and say, well, hello, welcome. You're not really welcome here.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of what you're saying too is just bringing things back into neutrality. Like, if you can't immediately bring things from like a place of doubt to a place of like, it's all happening. Like, even if you can find that moment of just like, all right, whatever happens is meant to happen. I feel like that can be such an easier shift instead of trying to go like that polar opposite.
Absolutely. I actually think I made a I don't know if I posted it, but I did record a video about how it's not easy to go from like not having something to literally accepting it. So it's in the space of neutrality that the jump can be easier. But it's really just like, the reason why things take so long is because we're what we want has one specific energy, and we have a different energy, frequency, whatever. And we're not in alignment yet. So the process is about becoming that thing, like matching yourself to whatever that is. And you could do that through multiple things. You could do that by, I in the past used to like watch interviews of people that I liked and stuff like that, and just like watched what it looked like to be what I wanted. And that was a step to take, and talking about it and believing you. The goal is to having whatever you want is really just figuring out how to be that thing. So you're now an energy match for it. The
Mm.
reason why it takes so long is because a lot of times we don't believe that we deserve that for whatever reason. It could be on the outside, you're like, this is what I want. I know that I deserve that. But there's so many underlying experiences and the voices of other people and the people you've seen in your past life that don't have it. There's a lot of repressed doubts that we might not even know about, that is keeping us from it. So in the process of going through the hard stuff and making it through the hard stuff and the trial and error and failing and getting back up, that process is what kind of confirms to our brain, like, actually, we do deserve this. Actually, we really are going to have this, because no matter what, we keep going through it. We keep doing what we have to do to get there.
Yeah. And the bigger the dream, the more you got to raise that frequency and get to that place. Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. No, it's interesting because I feel like in these moments of doubt, I can't, my body won't even let me get like super down. Like I'm just kind of observing it and like you said, holding its hand and like, okay, you're here. And like,
Yeah,
I'd love it if you weren't here, but you're here and we're going to work through it together. But before, like 10 years ago, I would have been like spiraling mentally.
It's
Yeah.
like it's happening, but you're also observing it happen. It's really wild because you're feeling it so strongly in your body, but you're also watching yourself feel it. And you're like, oh, that's interesting that that's like really affecting you right now.
And that's really what like this human experience is. It's just like observing what we're going, because we are two in one. We are humans and beings. We're worldly and we're spiritual. So it's kind of just like about balancing both of those. Like pretty much emotions are tied to, like when you're sad, that's like a worldly thing. That's tied to your body. You feel it in your body. So your soul, kind of getting your soul to observe like what you're going through without identifying with that, because your soul is bigger than that emotion. So you kind of got to like let your soul help you to know like, well, it's bigger than this one moment. And it's kind of like that battle that you're going
Yeah.
through.
Yeah. One of my biggest emotions where I really do that is when I get angry because I feel like I don't know, at this point, I kind of have a universal view, a very holistic view on emotions and like triggers and people and, action. So when I get angry, I'm always like, oh, interesting. I'm like, that's really interesting. Like, like, I feel like I'm talking to myself like a little kid. I'm like, whoa, why do you think that's coming up for you?
Literally.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's actually a modality in therapy, like narrative therapy, kind of just like separating yourself from whatever it is you're going through, because you are not that thing. Like just saying terms of like, instead of saying I have anxiety, like I'm feeling anxious,
Mhm.
like that, like I'm experiencing anxiety. Like just the way you rephrase things, sometimes it helps you to like separate from that moment or whatever is keeping you back, and that's really empowering, and it could help you push through.
Even that visual, like now that you said that you have your human self and then your soul self, even picturing that of like my human self feeling it and then my soul kind of just like almost hovering over me being like, all right, we're going to get through this. Like I feel like that's helpful to know. It's like it's not all of me that's consumed by this. It's just a part of me, the very human part, and that's totally okay. But yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And that's essentially what God is for us as well, too. The universe, whatever, that that extra entity that's looking over us the same way you can. And that's why I believe that, I believe that there's a God. There's definitely a higher source. I may not agree how other people choose to interpret it, but there's definitely a higher power. And I believe that we are an extension of that higher power. So, like the same way you were just saying, like your soul self looking at your human self on a grander scale, there is that source that we are an extension of that does the same for us. So whenever
Mhm.
our human body is just tired and we have limitations. We're only human. Like we're human beings, but like in the human aspect, there's so many limitations. So always relying on your higher self and the source that in which you come from. is another big part of how I'm able to do what I'm able to do. Because if it was just me, like my own human strength, I probably wouldn't get out of bed.
Well, yeah, it's
Yeah,
interesting. It's like you need that, at least for myself, like you said, like if it was just you, you'd be like, what's the point? You
right,
know,
exactly.
what's the point? But it's interesting how there's that just the paradox of life where you're like, you can be so zoomed in and so obsessed with like the current situation. And then at the same time, like the law of polarity, it's like on the other end of the spectrum, it's like we could die at any second and just like your physics teacher said, like, is any
Yeah,
of this real? You know? You're just here having an experience. And right now that experience feels really intense and really important. And it is. But at the same time, if you can zoom out, you can see kind of like the holistic view of it. And this is just a moment in time of your entire story.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
I'd love to know before we wrap this conversation up, just maybe like your observation of the collective right now and kind of what you think we're going through globally, just like as, I don't know, the human race and everything that's going on. Yeah, because like energetically, there's so many different things that you could touch on. I'd be curious just kind of what comes up for you in this moment.
Mhm.
Because there is kind of just this really strong collective energy that is going both positive and more negative. So I'd love to see what comes up for you when I say that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. We're going through a shift right now, and it's like two trains, and people are either going to get on the positive train and raise consciousness, or they're going to get deeper down. And unfortunate, it's not unfortunate, it keeps the world balanced, but there has to be that balance. So everyone's either consciously or unconsciously choosing what train they get on. Um, and I think that in order to change, for the world to change, we kind of have to go through this kind of downtime, this heaviness, because that, like I said before, in the heaviness is what is going to make more people wake up. The harder things get will force people to like open their eyes and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, the only reason why things are so difficult right now is because the world is preparing to shift, like a huge shift into more consciousness, more just becoming more awake. Um, and unfortunate, I don't like using the term unfortunate because it's not unfortunate, but um, it just comes with, going through the hard stuff.
Once you can like see the darkness or the more uncomfortable moments like not as necessarily negative or uncomfortable, just is. It just
Mhm.
is because these things happened and now they need to come to the surface to be cleared and for, like you said, for people to have these moments of, I don't know, their consciousness rising and choosing the more positive route and choosing the betterment for everyone. Um, and so, yeah, I get what you're saying that it's not necessarily, I mean, obviously the things that are happening are bad, but they've been happening. So the fact that there's more eyes on it, that is actually a good thing. Because then
Yeah.
we can choose to make the decision of, which route are we going to go down? This is, you're like at a fork in a road right now. Um, do you have any advice for people who maybe are new to making that decision? They're like new to this process of having this level of awareness of the world, or maybe choosing to see the world in this way, because it is like it's a lot less scary, at least I think it is, and I know you mentioned that too, like to see the world this way, like the law of polarity. But if you're newly stepping into this, do you have any advice for anyone who's wanting to kind of shift into this mindset?
Yeah. And I don't think people are going to like it, but you have to spend time alone. You have to spend time alone. There's too much going on the outside. There's no amount of consumption, like over consuming is not going to be what's going to get you those downloads. Like as soon as you turn on the TV or social media or whatever, you are now consuming others other things, other people's mindsets, other people's whatever. So it takes you further away from yourself, because whatever you consume, you become. That's really just what it is. If you consume something enough times, your brain will say, okay, this is what we like, this is what we are. And it'll actually start to look for more of those things. If you keep introducing something to your mind, it's going to continue to look for it even after you're done looking at it. So you would have to spend a lot of time alone just to figure out what it is, what your contribution to consciousness is, to the awareness that we are raising. everybody has a part. Everyone plays a part. No one person can raise conscious. It's a collective thing and everybody plays a part in it. And so you have to spend time with yourself to figure out what your role is and how you can do it, what your contribution to the awareness and awakening is going to be. And you can't really do that by consuming what other people are doing because your path might be different and you might say, oh, well, they're doing like this. Let me do it exactly like this. But your path might be different. We might need something else from you. So I think spending time alone, legitimately alone, like not even with your phone. Um, Obviously we need our phones. It's really like I know my phone's important because communication and stuff like that. But just finding the time in a day to do it, a couple minutes, as long as you it gets addicting, honestly. Like after you do it a little bit, you're like you really get to enjoy your solitude and the downloads that you get from that and you just feel like more whole. So spending time with yourself to figure out what your I can't tell you what your contribution is going to be. That's why I always tell people like spend time with yourself, write down your thoughts, sleep.
Hmm.
Sleep helps you to consolidate your thoughts and the difficult stuff that you've experienced in the day, the things that you've absorbed without even knowing, the things that go into your subconscious mind. Sleeping helps you to arrange those things. A lot of great scientists, they got their best ideas in theta, which is like right before you go to sleep. And so I'm a big sleeper. I love sleeping. A lot of society would judge you for it, but I don't care. I'm barely here. I'm barely a part of society. So, but yeah, sleeping and spending time alone, figuring out what you need.
You're speaking Danielle's language. Those are her two favorite things.
Literally.
Love that for us.
Yeah. No, we've gotten that advice from so many of our guests, and I think it's so true. We live in a world that's just there's so much going on. We have so many distractions. Like we are really truly rarely alone. So I think that's really good advice. It's like you're really not going to be able to tap into that intuition and really know what's going on with you unless you sit with it and you have a moment to yourself.
Yeah, and the space to shed the skin, like to shed the old versions of you, you need that time and space to do exactly that. And yeah, because it's going to feel unnatural at times choosing like the more positive route. Like retraining your brain takes time. And it's going to feel unnatural because so much of the world wants you to not necessarily wants you, it's just the way we've thought in the past is like to shift to the negative, to give in to the uncomfortable. So really having the space and time to sit with yourself and say, okay, what would it feel like if I leaned into faith, if I leaned into positivity, if I leaned into love right now? And then eventually I feel like that's when your life becomes more beautiful because you're like, I can flow through these uncomfy moments easy because I've practiced it, and that practice is, you need that time to be alone to be able to practice.
Exactly. It's definitely uncomfortable and weird at first, but like with everything, it's practicing and just making it a norm for you, for
Hmm.
sure.
Well, this has been such a beautiful conversation. I feel like we talked about so many amazing topics. Obviously, we could keep going for so long and talk to you. But one of the questions we love to ask our guests is what do you feel your purpose is in this life?
I love that question. Um, and I never really thought about it, but I believe that my purpose is to help people to remember. Like just to help them to remember that they are something bigger than this. Remember why they're here. Remember what's that they're supposed to be doing, how to be joyful while experiencing this time. And just knowing that they're just bigger than just human. It's more about love. It's more about connecting. It's more about finding joy and teaching people how to do that and loving one another.
This has been such a beautiful conversation, and just through the podcast, it's really interesting the people that I feel drawn to. And I felt so incredibly drawn to you. I was like, oh, we have to get her on the podcast because I feel like you would have just such interesting insights. And I do really love how you kind of started out as science. And then I've moved into therapy and then, can speak on these like esoteric spiritual concepts because I think it's something that the world really needs. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, guys. This was so much fun.
So, for anyone listening that wants to work with you, that wants to follow your journey, how can they do so?
So all my handles are it's Guru Benny, and that's with three B's. If you find any of my platforms, there's probably a link in my bio somewhere that has all my other things that you could look at.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this week's episode.
Talk to you next time.